After surviving 730 days amid bombs and gunfire, the soldier finally made it home, only to be left frozen in shock when he saw his daughter abandoned like ownerless trash, a memory no one wanted to acknowledge while his wife was preparing to walk down the aisle in lavish splendor. Yet a single look and one decisive act on his part were enough to make that seemingly perfect world collapse in silence. At 9 o'clock at night, the international airport felt like a massive machine that never stopped running. Ethan Walker stood amid the rushing crowd, his hand gripping the strap of a worn backpack, the only thing he had brought back from the battlefield. 2 years. 2 long years stretching like 2 decades had passed since the day he left this city. No one was there to meet him. No fanfare, no flowers, not even a friendly handshake. He had known that long before the plane touched down. Julia had left 2 years earlier. And his daughter Lily, the child he hadn't even had the chance to hold before he had to leave, was now somewhere in this vast city. The taxi carried him through streets that were both familiar and strangely distant. The old house was no longer his. The for sale sign had been replaced by a new family warm lights, glowing through the windows a picture of happiness he once believed he would return to. Ethan stood across the street looking up at the 2-story house with its small front garden, the place where he had planted rose bushes for Julia, the place where he had promised to build a swing for Lily. Now, all of it was nothing more than faded memories. It took 3 days of following scattered leads and asking old neighbors before he finally found the new address. A run-down apartment complex on the edge of the city. Ethan climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking beneath his feet. 3rd-floor apartment 307. The door opened and the face of a woman in her 40s appeared, Sarah, Julia's older sister. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, her expression shifting from surprise to coldness in an instant. Sarah's voice was hoarse, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Hello, Sarah. I'm back." Those simple words hung in the stifling air. Sarah neither invited him in nor closed the door. She just stood there staring at him as though she were looking at a ghost. "It's been 2 years, Ethan. 2 years without a single word." "I know. I'm sorry." The apology sounded painfully weak. How could he explain what had happened? How could he describe the long nights in darkness, the endless days when he didn't know whether he was alive or dead, when he had no idea what had become of his family? "I want to see Lily." Sarah didn't answer right away. She turned and looked into the dim apartment. "She's changed a lot, Ethan." Don't expect her voice broke off when a small figure appeared behind her. A thin child, long hair falling, loose wide eyes fixed on the doorway. Lily, his daughter. Time seemed to stand still. The 5-year-old stood there barefoot on the cold tile floor wearing oversized pajamas. The round face he remembered was now gaunt, her cheeks hollow. But what took Ethan's breath away were her eyes like Julia's, but with the light gone. They were empty, lifeless, like a shadow staring straight at him. Dad's back. Huh. Lily's small voice held no excitement. There was no smile, no running forward to throw her arms around him the way he had imagined 1,000 times. It was just a simple question, a flat confirmation, as if she were asking about a stranger. Ethan knelt down, reaching out but not daring to touch her. Yes, Daddy's back, Lily. Daddy's home, sweetheart. Lily didn't move. She just stood there looking at him with no emotion at all. Then, very slowly, she turned around, walked back into the dark apartment, and disappeared behind the wall. Ethan remained kneeling, his hand extended into the empty air. The small room in apartment 307 became Ethan's temporary refuge. Sarah didn't say much. She silently cleared a corner of the living room, spread out a thin mattress, and handed him an old pillow. Her eyes held things that words could not express, pity mixed with bitterness. On the first night, Ethan couldn't fall asleep. He lay staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to Lily's steady breathing from the next room. The child slept alone in the dark, needing no lullaby, no comforting arms. A 5-year-old who had learned to take care of herself in silence. The next morning, while Sarah was at work and Lily was still asleep, Ethan began searching for answers. He opened the old laptop Sarah had lent him and typed Julia Walker's name into the search bar. No results. He tried again using his wife's maiden name, Julia Martinez. Still nothing. Then a headline appeared in the news feed, one he would never forget: Mark Benson engaged. The screen exploded with a series of dazzling images. Ethan's fingers trembled as he scrolled down. The photographs looked as though they belonged to another world: lavish parties, on yachts, charity galas at five-star hotels, red carpet events blazing with camera flashes. And at the center of it all was the image of a woman he once believed he knew. Julia. Or rather, Juliette Martinez, the new name she had chosen for herself. She was more beautiful, more alluring, more confident in her glamorous evening gowns. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant under the photographer's lenses. Beside her stood Mark Benson, a man in his 40s dressed in an expensive suit wearing a self-assured smile. Businesswoman Juliette Martinez and billionaire Mark Benson, to be married next month at a luxury resort in the Maldives. The words struck Ethan like bolts of lightning. Next month. Not next year. Not some distant future. Next month. He scrolled further, reading every line of the most recent interview. Juliette spoke about a journey of self-discovery after the upheavals of her past. She talked about learning to let go of old burdens to embrace new happiness. She spoke of a second love as a gift from heaven. Not a single word about Ethan, not a single word about Lily. As if all those years of marriage, as if their shared daughter, as if everything they had built together were nothing more than a dream she wanted to erase. Ethan closed the laptop, gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. The sense of betrayal choked him from the inside. It wasn't just the pain of a husband who had lost his wife. It was a deep revulsion at realizing that the woman he once loved, the woman he trusted with his entire life, could abandon her own child to chase fame and wealth. Soft footsteps pulled him back to the present. Lily stood in the doorway wearing wrinkled pajamas, her hair tangled. The child's eyes rested on him not with curiosity but with a frightening indifference. "What are you doing, Dad?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm looking into a few things, sweetheart." Ethan tried to keep his voice steady, but it still trembled. Lily didn't ask anything more. She walked over to a corner of the room, sat down on the cold tile floor, opened an old notebook and took out a box of broken colored pencils. She began to draw aimless, indistinct lines forming no recognizable shapes. Ethan watched her in silence. The child didn't ask about her mother. She didn't ask why they were here. Lily had learned how to accept how to remain quiet, how to expect nothing from life anymore. How could a mother do such a thing? How could a woman look into her child's eyes and then turn away, erase every trace as if that child had never existed? The anger inside Ethan slowly transformed into a deeper, heavier, wordless pain. He no longer wanted to shout. He no longer wanted to smash anything. He only wanted to hold his small daughter sitting there to tell her that from now on he would never leave her alone again. But he didn't dare, because Lily no longer knew how to receive love from a stranger, even if that stranger was her father. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the crowded street below. Somewhere in this city, Julia was living in a luxurious penthouse, planning an extravagant wedding, enjoying everything money could buy. And here, in this cramped apartment, their daughter sat drawing colorless pictures wrapped in a silence filled with quiet hurt. Two worlds. One brutal truth. Ethan clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on the distance. He didn't know what he would do next. But one thing he knew for certain: he would not let Lily continue to live in this darkness. Even if he had to face that entire other world, he would bring the light back to his child. The Benson Corporation skyscraper towered over the center of the city like an impregnable fortress. Ethan stood before the transparent glass entrance, looking up at 30 stories gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere inside, Julia was working, or rather living a life completely detached from her past. "Do you have an appointment?" The security guard's cold voice pulled him back to the present. "I need to see Ms. Juliet Martinez. I'm someone she knows." The guard looked Ethan up and down the worn clothes, the faded shoes, the unshaven face. That look said everything. This was not the kind of person allowed inside a place like this. "Without an appointment, you can't go in. Please leave the premises. You don't understand. I really need to see her. This is a family matter, something important." "Sir, many people say that. Please step outside before we're forced to call security." Ethan stood there, his hands clenched into fists. He carried the strength of a soldier. He could push past these barriers, could make his way up to Julia's office. But he didn't. Not out of fear, but because he knew it would only make things worse. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was just a father who wanted to speak with the mother of his child. After 3 attempts on 3 consecutive days, Ethan finally left a letter at the reception desk. A short note written in a trembling hand. "Julie, I'm back. We need to talk about Lily. About our daughter." 2 days passed with no response. Then one evening, as Ethan sat beside Lily's bed, the child fast asleep, after an exhausting day, Sarah's phone rang. She handed it to Ethan, her face tense. The voice on the other end wasn't Julia's. It was a man's voice, low and cold. "Mr. Ethan Walker." "Yes, this is him. I'm the attorney for the Benson family. We've been informed that you're attempting to contact our client with unreasonable demands. I strongly advise you to stop immediately." Unreasonable. Ethan felt the blood rush to his head. "I just want to talk about my daughter. That's my right. You have no rights here, Mr. Walker. You've been absent for 2 years. Under the law, you've relinquished your parental rights. If you continue this harassment, we'll take stronger legal action." Relinquished. "I never relinquished anything. I couldn't make contact. I couldn't come back." "We're not interested in your reasons. Disappear, Mr. Walker. Don't interfere with the happiness others are building." The line went dead. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Ethan sat there, the phone still in his hand, shaking not from fear but from helplessness. He had faced the most dangerous situations, survived unimaginable trials, yet now confronted with the wall of money and power, he felt as weak as a child. Julia knew he was alive. She knew he had returned. And still, she chose to hide, to erase him from her life and from their daughters. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He turned on the television, flipping through channels without thinking. Then, a familiar image appeared on the screen, freezing him in place. Julia Juliet was seated on a well-known talk show. She wore an elegant white suit, her hair flawlessly styled, her smile radiant. Beside her sat Mark Benson, one hand resting on her shoulder, his gaze filled with pride. "We believe that family is the foundation of happiness," Julia said, her voice warm and confident. "And we want to share that happiness with the community. Our new charitable foundation will support families in need, especially children who require care and protection. Children who require care." Ethan glanced toward the next room where Lily lay on the old bed, her forehead still warm from the mild fever she'd had earlier that afternoon. Sarah had had to leave work early to take her to the doctor, spending what little money she had left on medicine. Meanwhile, on the screen, Julia smiled brightly, speaking about compassion and family love. The bitter irony of life. Ethan turned off the television and sat in the darkness, his hands clenched together. The fury inside him reached its peak, not an explosive rage, but a cold, profound resolve. He didn't need Julia to come back. He didn't need an apology or an explanation. But he needed justice. Justice for Lily, the child who deserved to be loved, cared for, and to live in the light. Ethan walked into his daughter's room and sat down beside the bed. Lily slept peacefully, her breathing steady, though her forehead was still warm. He gently stroked her hair, and for the first time in many days, he felt an invisible bond reconnecting them. "I promise you," he whispered into the darkness, "I'll bring the light back to you. Even if I have to face the entire world, I won't let you live in this darkness anymore." Lily didn't hear him, but that promise was etched deep into Ethan's heart, a vow he would keep at any cost. A knock sounded one weekend afternoon while Sarah was preparing dinner, and Lily sat drawing in the corner of the room. Ethan opened the door, and the familiar face before him left him momentarily frozen. Thomas Lane stood there tall, broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and a sun-weathered face marked by small scars. This was the man who had fought beside Ethan during their hardest days, who had shielded him when everything was falling apart. "Ethan Walker, you lucky bastard." Thomas's deep voice carried the words, but his eyes held warmth. The two old soldiers embraced without a word. What they had been through together needed no explanation. "How did you find me?" Ethan asked, stepping back, still hardly believing his eyes. "Our network's still out there. When I heard you were back, I knew you'd need a friend." Thomas glanced around the small room, his gaze settling on Lily. "Is that your daughter, Ethan?" Knotted emotion rising in his throat. "Lily. She's 5 now, but I understand." Thomas didn't need to hear more. He stepped inside and sat down on the worn chair, his eyes never leaving Lily, the child absorbed in her clumsy drawings, seemingly unaware of the stranger. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, the two men sat in the dark living room, lit only by the dim yellow glow of an old bulb. Ethan told him everything about Julia, about Mark Benson, about the wall of power he couldn't break through, about the helplessness that was eating away at him day by day. Thomas listened in silence, arms folded across his chest. When Ethan finished, he nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do? I don't know, Thomas. I can't use force. I can't do the things I used to do. This isn't a battlefield." "Not a battlefield." Thomas looked straight into Ethan's eyes. "You're wrong. This is still a battlefield, Ethan, just with a different enemy. Not bullets, but money. Not bombs, but power. But you're still a soldier, and a soldier knows how to fight for what's right." Ethan glanced toward the bedroom where Lily was sleeping. "I don't want revenge. I just want... You want justice." "I know." Thomas stood and walked to the window. "Then we don't use our fists. We use the truth. The truth is always stronger than anything else, especially against people who live on lies." But how Thomas turned back a faint smile on his lips. "Leave that to me. I have a few friends, people who are very good at uncovering hidden truths. They'll help us." In the days that followed, while Thomas worked outside, Ethan spent his time with Lily. He tried to connect with her, not easily, not quickly, but little by little. One morning while Sarah was at work, Ethan sat beside Lily as she played with an old doll. He looked at his daughter's long, tangled hair, and an idea struck him. "Would you like me to braid your hair?" he asked gently. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. Then very slowly she nodded. Ethan didn't know how to braid hair. A soldier's rough hands weren't made for such delicate tasks, but he tried. His clumsy fingers divided her hair into 3 sections and wove them together. The braid was uneven, not pretty, but it was the effort of a father. "All done," he said, his voice full of pride. Lily touched the braid, then looked back at him. For the first time, a small spark of light flickered in the child's eyes. A fragile smile, almost unconscious, appeared on her lips. "Thank you, Daddy." Those simple words shattered every wall Ethan had built around his heart. He reached out, and Lily, the child who had once been afraid, who had once kept her distance, slowly placed her small hand into his. Her tiny fingers closed tightly around his rough ones. She didn't let go. Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back tears. This was it. This was why he had to fight, not for himself, not to reclaim Julia, but for this child, the small life that was slowly learning to trust again. That evening, Thomas returned with a thick file. He set it on the table, his expression serious. "I have what you need. But before we do anything, I need to know what you want. Do you want to ruin the wedding, drag them into court, or do you want something else?" Ethan looked at the file, then toward the bedroom where Lily slept, the crooked braid he had made still in her hair. He let out a slow breath. "I'm not here to ruin a wedding, Thomas. I'm here to demand that her mother answer to her own conscience, even if only for a moment. I want Julia to look into her daughter's eyes and remember that she was once a mother, I want her to face the truth she's been running from. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we have a plan. And trust me, it's going to shake the perfect world she's been building. Ethan looked down at his hands, hands that once held weapons now trembling with emotion. He had found a new mission. Not to fight for his country, but to fight for his daughter. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone, no matter how powerful or wealthy, stand in his way. The 5-star seaside resort shimmered in the late afternoon sun. White flowers were artfully arranged along the aisle, and a red carpet stretched from the entrance to the outdoor ceremony space. Guests in elegant suits and glamorous evening gowns sat on pristine white chairs waiting for the sacred moment. Ethan stood outside the gate looking in at the lavish scene. He wore his old military uniform. Beside him, Lily stood in a simple white dress that Thomas had bought for her. Her hair was neatly braided this time, not by Ethan's clumsy hands, but by Sarah, who had cried when she learned of his plan. The child clutched her father's hand tightly, her eyes scanning the crowd with fear. "Daddy, I'm scared," Lily said, her voice trembling. Ethan knelt down, bringing his eyes level with hers. "I know, sweetheart. But don't be afraid. I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you. Is Mom in there?" That simple question pierced Ethan's heart. "Yes, honey. She's in there. And today she's going to have to look you in the eye." The wedding music began soft, romantic sweet. Julia appeared in a dazzling white wedding gown, adorned with crystals and pearls. She walked slowly down the red carpet, a radiant smile on her lips, her beauty flawless, almost goddess-like. At the altar, Mark Benson stood waiting, the confident expression of a man who seemed to have everything. Ethan waited. He waited until Julia reached Mark, until the priest began the prayers, until the air was filled with reverence and expectation. "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." The fateful words echoed through the silence. Ethan stepped forward. The sound of military boots striking the red carpet fell like steady drum beats. Every head turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Ethan neither rushed nor hesitated. He walked forward at an even pace, his hand gripping Lily's. The child followed her father, head lowered, but she did not cry. Julia turned around, and the instant her eyes met Ethan's, all the color drained from her face. She stood frozen, her mouth open, unable to speak. Ethan reached the altar and stopped 3 steps away from Julia. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He simply stood there, solid and immovable like a bronze statue, letting everyone see him. "Ethan," Julia whispered, her voice shaking. You can't." "I'm not here to disrupt your wedding," Ethan said calmly, his voice low and clear, carrying across the ceremony space. "I'm here to bring our daughter to meet her mother." He gently guided Lily forward. The small child stood in the vast open space, under dozens of curious and stunned gazes, her wide eyes fixed on the woman in the magnificent white gown. "This little girl is her daughter. And mine." Ethan continued, each word falling like a hammer blow. "Her name is Lily Walker. She's 5 years old. She's living in a rundown apartment being raised by her aunt, while her mother—" He paused and looked straight at Julia. "While her mother is hosting a $1 million wedding." Silence fell. No whispers, no movement. Everyone stared at Julia, the woman who had once seemed perfect to them, now trembling like a leaf in the wind. "No, that's not like that." Julia shook her head, her voice breaking. That's the past." The past. Ethan took 1 step closer. "Is this child the past? A 5-year-old living without a mother? Is that the past you're trying to bury?" Julia looked down at Lily. For the first time in 2 years, she looked into her daughter's eyes, eyes exactly like her own, dark brown, holding an emptiness she could not deny. The perfect mask shattered. Tears streamed down Julia's cheeks, destroying her carefully applied makeup. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, trying to stifle her sobs. "Lily!" She whispered the name as if truly saying it for the first time. Mark Benson, who had stood silently beside her, now turned to look at Julia with cold eyes. No questions, no explanations. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, then slowly stepped down from the altar. "Mark, wait. Please." Julia reached out, but he did not turn back. He walked out of the ceremony space, and with him went every illusion of the perfect life Julia had built. The guests began to stir whispers, judgmental looks. Julia stood alone in the middle of it all, her wedding dress now resembling a garment of mourning. Ethan bent down and lifted Lily into his arms. The child wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. He did not look at Julia again. He simply turned away and walked down the red carpet, out of the chaotic ceremony, out of that false world. Behind him, Julia's sobs rang out, not the tears of a joyful bride, but the tears of a woman facing everything she had lost. Ethan stepped onto the beach, the late afternoon sun shining down. He set Lily on the soft sand and knelt beside her. "You did so well, Lily. I'm proud of you." Lily smiled, a real smile, small but filled with light. "Mom saw me, didn't she, Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. She saw you. And from now on, things will be different." Father and daughter sat together looking out at the vast blue sea. This was not the end. There were still many wounds that would take time to heal. But this was release for Ethan, for Lily, and perhaps in some way for Julia as well. 48 hours. That was all it took for a carefully built empire of reputation to collapse. Ethan didn't have social media, but Thomas showed him. Footage from the ceremony, someone had recorded it, spread everywhere at a staggering speed. Headlines flooded in like rain. Businesswoman Juliet Martinez, a mother who abandoned her child, $1 million wedding, shattered by the truth of the past, billionaire. Mark Benson calls off engagement after explosive scandal. In every image, Julia's face appeared no longer the picture of flawless beauty, but the unraveling of a woman forced to confront the consequences of her own choices. The luxurious penthouse Julia once took such pride in became her prison. She didn't dare step outside. Her phone rang non-stop, not with congratulations, but with contract cancellations and notices of terminated partnerships. The brands that once sought her out as a spokesperson now withdrew as if avoiding a contagion. The charitable foundation she and Mark had planned to launch shut down before it ever opened. Her close friends among the elite gone as if they had never existed. Julia sat on the cold marble floor, expensive gowns scattered around her, her powered-off phone lying beside her. She stared into the large mirror across the room. The woman reflected there was no longer the alluring Juliet Martinez. She was simply Julia Walker, a mother who had abandoned her child in pursuit of an illusion. Tears streamed down her face, no makeup left to hide them. Regret surged like a rising tide mixed with crushing humiliation. Not because she had lost money or status, but because she realized she had given up the most precious thing of all her daughter's love in exchange for things that now vanished like smoke. She thought of Lily, the small figure standing before her at the ceremony. Eyes exactly like her own, yet filled with an emptiness Julia herself had created. "Lily, my darling," she whispered into the empty space. No one answered. She had chosen this solitude, and now it enveloped her like a boundless night. Meanwhile, the courts moved with remarkable speed. Thomas had prepared everything, medical records showing Lily had not been properly cared for over the past 2 years, evidence of Julia's prolonged absence, financial records proving she had provided no support for her daughter. Every detail was airtight. The ruling came within a week, a restraining order. Julia was prohibited from seeing Lily until a final custody decision was made, and given the evidence, her chances of regaining custody were virtually non-existent. Ethan accepted the documents from the attorney, but he felt no satisfaction. There was no sense of victory, only emptiness, the kind that comes from watching someone you once loved fall apart, even when that person had hurt you deeply. He sat alone in the small living room, the yellow light flickering overhead. This victory should have brought relief, but instead, it brought sadness. He was afraid. Afraid that what had happened would leave a permanent emotional scar on Lily. The child had seen her mother collapse before her eyes had stood under the harsh spotlight of public judgment. Would she be able to overcome that soft footsteps made him turn? Lily stood in the doorway, her hair tousled, sleep still heavy in her eyes. "Why aren't you sleeping, Daddy?" she asked softly. "I'm thinking, sweetheart." Lily walked over and climbed onto the chair beside him. "You're thinking about Mom, aren't you?" Ethan froze. The insight of this 5-year-old amazed him. He nodded slowly. "I'm worried about you. I'm afraid what just happened might make you sad." Lily was quiet for a moment, then placed her small hand on his. "I'm not sad, Daddy. I just want to be with you. You're the one who stayed with me." Those simple words broke through every barrier in Ethan's heart. The child held no resentment, no bitterness. She wanted only love, the one thing she had been denied for far too long. He pulled Lily into his arms, feeling her steady breathing. "I promise you from now on I won't ever leave you alone again, no matter what happens. I know, Daddy. I trust you." That trust, pure and uncomplicated, was the greatest reward Ethan could have received. Not a courtroom victory, not justice being served, but the faith of his daughter. That night, after rocking Lily to sleep, Ethan stood by the window looking out at the city lights glittering below. Somewhere out there, Julia was facing the ashes of the honor she had once built. He didn't know where she would go or what she would do next, but he hoped faintly that she would learn something from all that had happened, that some things cannot be bought with money, that blood-bound love cannot be erased by lies, that true dignity does not lie in the glare of spotlights, but in quiet acts done for those we love. Ethan turned away from the window and walked into his daughter's room. He sat beside the bed looking at Lily's innocent face as she slept. The road ahead was still long. The wounds would take time to heal, but this time they would walk it together, father and daughter. And that was all they needed. The penthouse that had once been filled with light was now left in darkness. Julia sat on the cold wooden floor, the heavy curtains drawn tight, cutting her off from the outside world. Around her were packed boxes, not for a move to someplace better, but because this apartment would soon no longer belong to her. In front of her lay a blank sheet of paper and a pen, the simplest of things, yet the heaviest. Julia stared at the words she had just written, tears soaking the page, the ink bleeding and smearing. "My dearest Lily, I don't know where to begin. Perhaps I should apologize, but what does an apology mean when I've hurt you this deeply? I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I only want you to know that among all the mistakes I've made, there is one truth I cannot deny: I once loved you. And a part of me has always loved you. But my love wasn't strong enough to keep me there, not strong enough to fight my own weakness. I chose the easier path to run away, to erase, to forget. And now I must live with the consequences of that choice. Don't become like me, Lily. Be stronger. Love those who deserve it. And if you can live the life I was never able to live, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Julia read the trembling lines again, then slowly folded the paper. But she didn't put it in an envelope. She didn't write an address. She didn't dare send it, because she knew she no longer had the right to intrude into her daughter's life, not even with a letter. She set the letter down on the table, turned away, and walked into the empty bedroom. A room that had once been filled with dreams of the future was now nothing more than a cold, hollow space. She lay down on the bed and curled into herself like a child, letting the tears fall freely. Loneliness closed in, not the temporary kind, but the absolute loneliness of someone who had pushed herself to the very edge. Meanwhile, in the small apartment, Ethan was struggling with a role he had never been prepared for, being a single father. Sarah continued to help as much as she could, but she had her own job, her own life. Ethan had to learn on his own how to cook for Lily, how to brush her hair every morning, how to read bedtime stories to help her fall asleep. But the hardest part wasn't the practical skills. It was the nightmares that tormented him every night, images from a distant past, returning sudden sounds jolting him awake, his heart pounding like a drum. He would wake drenched in sweat, his hands shaking, taking several minutes to realize where he was. And he was afraid. Afraid that Lily would see her father in that fragile state. Afraid that he wasn't strong enough to take care of her. After what happened at the wedding, Lily grew quieter. She no longer drew, no longer played with her dolls. She would sit by the window staring outside with distant eyes. Sarah said it was a natural reaction that Lily needed time. But Ethan knew it was a sign of a deep sadness that a 5-year-old couldn't put into words. One afternoon, as Ethan struggled to prepare dinner, Lily walked over and stood silently beside him. He looked down, forcing a smile. "Are you hungry? I'm making soup, sweetheart." Lily didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her small fingers gently tugging at his shirt. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, honey. Does Mom hate me?" At that question, Ethan turned off the stove and knelt down to her level, placing his hands on Lily's shoulders. "No, sweetheart. Your mom doesn't hate you. But she didn't want to stay with me. She chose someone else." Small tears rolled down Lily's cheeks, not loud sobs, just the quiet tears of silent sorrow. Ethan pulled her into his arms, feeling her small body trembling against him. "I know you're sad. I am too. But I want you to know something. Your mom's choices weren't because of you. They were about her. You didn't do anything wrong, Lily. You are a wonderful child, and I'm so proud to be your dad." "Then why didn't Mom stay with us?" It was a question Ethan himself didn't have a satisfying answer for. How do you explain the complicated choices of adults to a 5-year-old? How do you tell a child that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people are weak, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart, not because they're bad, but because they lose their way? Your mom lost her way. But that doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. Lily wrapped her arms tightly around her father's neck, her tears soaking into his shoulder. Ethan sat there holding her in silence, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. That night, after rocking Lily to sleep, Ethan sat alone in the dark. He looked out the window. The city was still glowing, but now those lights only reminded him of wounds that hadn't yet healed. He made a decision. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't live in the shadow of the past, in a city where every street corner held painful memories. They needed a fresh start, a place where Lily could grow up without being haunted by what had happened. Ethan opened his laptop and began to search. Small towns far from the noisy city with clean air and honest people. A place where a father could raise his daughter in peace. He would take Lily away, far away, to begin again. And in the darkened penthouse, Julia still lay there clutching her loneliness, unaware that the people she once loved were preparing to leave her life forever. Golden sunlight poured down on the narrow road leading into the town of Espiranza. Ethan drove the old car past rows of palm trees, leaning gently in the sea breeze, while Lily sat beside him, gazing out the window with a curiosity she hadn't shown in weeks. "Daddy, look, the ocean." Lily's voice rang out full of excitement. Ethan followed the direction of her pointing finger, a smile spreading across his face. The vast blue sea stretched all the way to the horizon, gentle waves washing over white sand. There were no suffocating skyscrapers, no blaring car horns, only the whisper of the wind and the cries of seagulls circling above. "Yes, sweetheart, that's the ocean. From now on, we'll be living near the sea." The small house they had rented was only a 5-minute walk from the beach. A single-story wooden home with a red-tiled roof, a front porch with a swing and pots of bright purple bougainvillea. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm and filled with natural light. Lily ran around the house, exploring every corner with an enthusiasm Ethan had never seen in her before. She stopped at a large window overlooking the ocean and pressed her hand against the glass. "Daddy, can I see the ocean from here every day?" "That's right, sweetheart. Every morning when you wake up, you'll see the sea." For the first time in so long, Ethan saw light return to his daughter's eyes. The first days in Espiranza passed in an unfamiliar peace. Life here moved so slowly that Ethan had to remind himself not to rush. The locals were friendly, greeting them as they passed, asking little about their past. That was exactly what Ethan needed: privacy and calm. Every afternoon, he took Lily down to the beach. She sat on the sand, touching the cool seawater, for the first time giggling as the waves lapped at her feet. Ethan sat beside her, watching with a heart full of gratitude. This was the life she deserved: not dark rooms, but sunlight, blue water, and laughter. Their neighbor was Penny Martinez, a woman in her 30s with a warm smile and gentle brown eyes. She was a painter living alone in a small house filled with artwork and fresh flowers. Penny never asked about their past. She simply welcomed them with a basket of homemade pastries and an open invitation to visit any time. "I hear you like to draw," Penny asked Lily one afternoon as the child sat alone on the porch. Lily looked up, her eyes cautious. I draw, but my drawings aren't very good." "There's no such thing as a bad painting, sweetheart," Penny said with a smile. "Only paintings that aren't finished yet." She handed Lily a new set of watercolors. "I can teach you to paint if you like." And so every Saturday afternoon, Lily went to Penny's house. They sat on the porch with easels and blank sheets of paper in front of them. Penny taught her basic strokes, how to mix colors, how to see the world through an artist's eyes. Gradually, Lily's paintings began to change. No longer gray, shapeless scribbles, but bright blue beaches, golden flowers, birds soaring across the sky. Vivid colors appeared: yellow, orange, blue, as if the child's spirit were slowly opening again. Ethan watched from a distance, deeply moved. This was a sign of healing. Lily was finding herself again. Penny didn't forget Ethan either. She invited father and daughter over for dinner on weekend evenings, simple meals of fresh seafood and salad. She never asked why Ethan startled at loud noises, never questioned his long silences. She was simply there, patient and gentle, without judgment. "You're doing a good job with your daughter," Penny said one evening after Lily had fallen asleep. The two of them were sitting on the porch, listening to the sound of the waves in the dark. "I don't know if I am," Ethan sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark." "But you're stumbling together with her." "That's what matters," Penny said, turning to him. "Lily is changing. She's learning how to smile again, how to trust. That's not because of time, it's because of your love." Her words touched something deep inside Ethan. He began to believe that maybe he wasn't as inadequate as he thought. Maybe he was doing something right. Weeks turned into months. Ethan found a job at the local boatyard, simple work, but steady. He became less guarded, started greeting neighbors, even joining community gatherings. The nightmares still came, but less often. And when they did, he no longer felt helpless, because Lily was in the next room, his reason to keep going. One afternoon, when Ethan returned home from work, he saw Lily and Penny sitting on the beach. Lily was painting and Penny sat beside her, pointing up at the clouds. Ethan watched from a distance, a picture of peace. His daughter was growing up in a loving environment, surrounded by kind people, and he knew they had made the right decision in coming here. Espiranza, the town whose name means hope in Spanish, was giving them exactly that. Hope for a better future. Hope that wounds would heal. Hope that love and patience could mend even the deepest scars. Ethan walked down to the beach and sat beside his daughter. Lily looked up and smiled, a real radiant smile. "Daddy, look at my painting. I drew our family." On the paper were 3 figures: a tall man, a small child, and a woman with long hair. They were standing on the beach holding hands. Ethan looked at Penny, then back at the painting. His heart warmed. Perhaps this was their new family, not perfect, but full of love, and that was all they needed. Saturday morning began like any other day in Espiranza. Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the gentle sound of the ocean waves. He stepped into the living room and saw that Lily was already up, sitting at the table with a sheet of paper and her box of watercolors. "You're up early," he said, gently smoothing her hair. I want to finish this painting before I go to my art lesson with Miss Penny." Lily smiled, her eyes bright. Ethan poured her a glass of orange juice and turned back to the kitchen to make breakfast. But halfway through, Lily's voice called out, making him turn around. "Daddy, I'm done." "Come look." Ethan wiped his hands and walked over. He looked down at the painting, and what he saw took his breath away. On the paper were 3 figures holding hands on a beach: a tall man with short hair, a small child with long hair flowing down, and a woman with a warm smile. They stood beneath golden sunlight with deep blue waves behind them. But what made Ethan's throat tighten was the small corner on the right side of the painting, a woman's figure seen from behind, walking away, slowly dissolving into the horizon. The colors in that part were faded, like a memory losing its sharpness. And beneath the painting in uneven pencil letters were the words, "I'm okay now. I'm not waiting anymore." Ethan knelt down and placed his hand on Lily's shoulder. Why did you draw this, sweetheart?" Lily looked into his eyes, her clear gaze free of sadness. "I thought about Mom last night. I miss her. But I know she can't be here, and I'm okay. Because I have you and Miss Penny and the ocean and new friends. I'm happy now, Daddy." Those simple words coming from the mouth of a 6-year-old carried a remarkable maturity. Lily had let go, not because she had forgotten, but because she had chosen to embrace her present happiness instead of holding on to past pain. Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Lily. You're the strongest little girl I've ever known." That afternoon, while Lily was at her art lesson with Penny, Ethan found a thick envelope in the mailbox. There was no return name, only the seal of a law office from their old city. His heart tightened as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the familiar handwriting he had once loved, now stirring complicated emotions. "Dear Ethan, you may be wondering why I'm writing this letter. I don't know whether you'll read it or tear it up the moment you recognize my handwriting, but I have to write. I owe you and I owe Lily these words. I'm not apologizing anymore because I know an apology isn't enough to undo what I've done. I only want you to know that I'm living with the consequences of my choices. I've lost everything, my job, my reputation, my relationships. But the most terrifying loss is my daughter. I've lost the right to call myself a mother. Every night I lie awake thinking about Lily. How is she now? Is she happy? Does she hate me? Those questions torment me endlessly. I'm not writing to ask to see Lily. I know I don't deserve that. I only want you to know that if one day she asks about me, please tell her that her mother loved her. Even though I failed miserably as a mother, even though I hurt her deeply, that love was real. It was always there, even when I tried to bury it. You did the right thing by taking her away. Lily deserves a better life far from the false world I once chased. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that she finds peace." Julia Ethan finished reading and set the letter down on the table. He sat quietly for a long time, looking out the window at the endless blue sea. Emotions rose within him: anger, pain, compassion, and finally calm. Julia was living with the consequences of her choices. But the greatest punishment wasn't imposed by society, it came from her own conscience. Ethan understood that. He picked up the letter, walked into his bedroom, opened the bottom drawer, and placed it inside. He didn't tear it up. He didn't burn it. And he didn't reply. He simply put it away, letting it rest like a part of the past that needed to sleep. Perhaps one day when Lily was older, when she asked about her mother, he would give her this letter to read. He would let her decide forgiveness or not, reunion or not. That choice would be hers, not his. But for now, Lily was still young. She needed to be protected from the complicated emotions of adults. She needed to live in the simple happiness of childhood, running on the beach, painting pictures, laughing freely. Ethan closed the drawer and stepped outside. He looked toward Penny's house, where Lily's laughter rang clearly. The child was pointing at a painting, saying something that made Penny laugh in delight. He smiled. This was their family now. Not perfect, not conventional, but full of love and honesty. Forgiveness doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes it simply means letting the past rest, allowing wounds to heal without reopening them. Ethan had chosen that path not for Julia, but for Lily, for himself, for the future they were building. He walked down to the beach and sat on a wooden chair, gazing out at the sea. A cool breeze carried the scent of salt. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange. Lily ran down and jumped into his lap. "Daddy, Miss Penny says tomorrow we're going to the seafood market and cook dinner together. Is that okay?" "That's fine, sweetheart." "Of course." Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and looked out at the ocean. "Daddy, I'm really happy here." "So am I, honey." "I'm very happy too." And they sat there, father and daughter, in the warm glow of sunset, letting the past drift away with the waves into the open sea. 5 o'clock in the morning. The sky was still gray, but the first hints of light were already appearing along the horizon. Ethan woke, not from a nightmare, but from the soft sound of small footsteps outside his room. He opened the door and saw Lily standing there in her pajamas, her eyes bright. "Daddy, can we go watch the sunrise? Miss Penny said today's sunrise will be really beautiful." Ethan smiled, his heart filled with a simple, quiet happiness. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make us some hot cocoa." 10 minutes later, father and daughter walked down to the beach, each holding a warm cup of cocoa. The sand was soft beneath their feet, the sea breeze gentle. They sat down side by side, shoulders touching, gazing toward the horizon where the sun was about to rise. Daddy, Lily said softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "I dreamed about Mom last night." Ethan froze for a moment but said nothing, simply listening. "In my dream, Mom was standing far away, waving at me. She didn't say anything, but I felt like she wanted me to be happy, and I want her to be happy too." The simple words of a 6-year-old carried a compassion many adults never reach. Ethan pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You are the most wonderful little girl in the world, Lily. I'm so lucky to have you." The sun began to rise above the horizon, its first rays tearing through the gray sky. Shades of orange, gold, and red blended together, creating a breathtaking natural canvas. The blue sea reflected the light, shimmering as if coated in gold. Lily stood up, set her cup of cocoa down, and ran toward the water. She stopped where the waves gently washed over her feet, spread her arms wide, and lifted her face toward the rising sun. "I have my daddy," Lily shouted, her voice carrying across the stillness of dawn. "I have my daddy. I have Miss Penny. I have the ocean. I have everything. I'm so happy." That cry, full of joy, full of freedom, hit Ethan's heart like a wave. He stood up and walked to her, tears spilling freely. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of happiness, washing away the dust of the battlefield, washing away the pain of family loss, washing away everything that had once haunted him. He knelt down and held Lily tightly in his arms. "I'm happy too, sweetheart. So very happy." They stood there together, father and daughter, in the cool seawater beneath the brilliant sun, now lighting up the world. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new journey, one built on love, patience, and trust. From a distance on the shore, Penny stood on her porch, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching the two of them with a warm smile. She didn't come closer, didn't disturb the sacred moment. She simply stood there, a quiet companion, always ready when needed. Hundreds of miles away, in the small apartment Julia had recently rented, no longer a luxurious penthouse, just a modest room with a window overlooking the street. The woman once known as Juliet Martinez stood by the window looking into the distance. She didn't know where Ethan and Lily were. She didn't know whether they were happy. But this morning, for the first time in months, she felt a small measure of peace. She had lost everything: money, fame, relationships. Yet within that loss, she had found something more precious: honesty. She no longer needed to pretend, no longer needed to wear a mask. She was simply Julia, a deeply flawed woman trying to live with the choices she had made. She opened a drawer and took out a sheet of paper and a pen. This time, she didn't write to Lily. She wrote to herself a promise that she would live better not to reclaim what she had lost, but to be worthy of her daughter's memory in the future. One day, if you want to see your mother, I will be here. Not as the false Juliet, but as Julia, the mother who once loved you. She folded the paper and placed it inside a small journal. Then she turned back to the window and looked at the sky as it continued to brighten. She smiled a bitter smile, but when touched with a hint of peace. This was not the happy ending she had once imagined, but it was redemption from lies, from the trap of fame. She was free, even though that freedom had come at the highest possible cost. Back on the beach in Espiranza, the sun had fully risen, blazing across the sky. Lily sat on her father's shoulders, pointing toward the horizon. "Daddy, look, I see dolphins," she cried excitedly. Ethan followed her gaze and saw a pod of dolphins leaping across the water, forming graceful arcs. He smiled, his heart full. Happiness is not flawless perfection. It is not the absence of pain or scars. Happiness is knowing how to cherish those who stay with us, finding light in the darkness, and understanding that no matter how rough life becomes, we can always stand up and keep moving forward. Ethan looked at Lily, his small daughter laughing brightly on his shoulders. Then he looked out at the vast blue sea where the sun shone brilliantly. This was their new life. This was their new family. And this was the happiness they deserved. Two silhouettes, one tall, one small, stood against the glowing dawn sky, moving forward with steady steps. The painful past had been laid to rest. A brighter future awaited. And upon the gentle ocean waves, a new chapter of their lives was being written by love, by resilience, and by faith in tomorrow. Sunrise on the waves, a new beginning, a promise of hope. The story of Ethan and Lily reminds us that sometimes the deepest healing does not come from victory or revenge, but from the choice to stay with love, with responsibility, and with hope. One person who refuses to turn away can change an entire childhood, and in doing so, save themselves as well. If this story touched you, please follow and share it to help spread journeys of kindness, courage, and new beginnings. Because somewhere out there are still Lilies waiting to be loved, and Ethans who have yet to realize that they themselves are the light someone else desperately needs.